Hi, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Molly.
And you're listening to the
Two Sisters on Adventures podcast.
Also, I'm going to tell you this at the front of the episode, but if you'd like to see any pictures or videos from what we talk about here today, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Two Sisters on Adventures. And also, if you enjoy this podcast, you can always give us a rating or a review and subscribe. How exciting. So, we last left off, we had all gone to bed before our big summit day on Sahale in the North Cascades National Park. So we got up that morning. I feel like we set our alarm for like 3 or 3:15, something like that. And I feel like we tried to be as efficient as possible, but we weren't ready to go until I think our leave time was like a window to him of 4 to 4:30. And we didn't leave until like 4:25, which I kind of...
And why was it 4:25?
I mean, I had to go poop twice. Is that what you're referring to?
Just the multiple trips to the backcountry toilet.
Yeah. And I mean, the good news was there was a nice vault toilet up there. So it's like, is it a vault toilet? Is that okay? A composting toilet, but it's like a really nice one. So at the very least, we had that to look forward to. So finally, it was time to head up. And I was kind of nervous because I didn't want to have to go number 2 on the mountain because then you'd have to use a blue bag, which I'm comfortable using. But it was just kind of like, it's hard to wrap your mind around, like, I'm going to be using a blue bag on a glacier. You know what I mean? So it's just a different concept. So anyway, we
were really excited though when we first woke up because we were using a tent that the guide company had supplied, which was probably like 1.5 times bigger than the Nemo Hornet in surface area inside. So we actually had enough room to like sit fully upright and like we could change our clothes in the tent, where like with the Nemo Hornet it's just like very compact.
You can change your clothes inside of a Nemo Hornet with another person in there. It's just quite a process, quite an experience. You got to know the person pretty well. Anyway, so yeah, it was very lovely waking up inside of that tent and being able to sit up. However, we were able to sit up in the Nemo Hornet before we got our really comfortable sleeping pad. Yeah. So if that's important to us, I guess we can always just go back to your sleeping pad that has a hole in it now. Yeah. Anyway, so we started heading up the mountain, and it was kind of interesting because to even get to the glacier, we had to walk for a little while. I don't know if you'd say like half a mile or a mile over just slabs of kind of different types of rock. Some of it was definitely granite. It seemed like they had some copper mines there. So, I mean, maybe some of it was, it was a whole mix of rocks. But it was kind of interesting because, again, there were skills that we learned that didn't only apply to climbing on this trip. So it kind of was interesting to use some cross-country navigation skills and to hear about those from our guide as well. One thing that he would talk about is kind of as you look for a path upwards, that kind of contours, like with the mountain and where you want to go, how you want to make sure that as much as is possible, you never lose the ground that you gained. So if you're going up, you don't want to pick something that goes up really sharply, but then down really sharply again. You want to try and pick the thing that most consistently has you going upwards.
Yeah, so we're talking in terms of elevation gain. You're making a trajectory of gaining without giving up ground. And it's even interesting to see how instead of going like just straight up, towards the highest point, you can kind of weave your way along, but continuously gain. So that was really interesting. And this is when Carrie and I were kind of free from this concept of we're trying to get somewhere, and so we need to find a dirt path to walk on or cairns to follow or, a place where people have set up stones in a way that lines a path. No, we're just now traveling to our end goal, which is getting to the top of Sahale Peak, but we're able to take whatever path or route we deem acceptable. So our guide was leading the way, but I think this was really an interesting realization for us that we're able to travel wherever we want all of a sudden versus being confined to a trail. And so that was cool. And then we did find an entrance to a mine at one point, which was fascinating because we were, traveling along cross country. We were going on more of the slabs. And then all of a sudden we got to this area where it was all just this gravel and dirt. And we're walking up this fairly steep slope that was just dirt. And it was so strange because none of the rest of the mountain was like that. And we got to the top of this pile and here was the literal opening to a mine. So the reason for the dirt that was everywhere was because I think that's what had been bored out of the mountain when they created the mine shaft. And so we decided we didn't have time to explore that as well. But it's funny because I'm thinking of the picture that we had. Our guide, he had told us, if you're trying to manage heat and you don't want to overheat, we're wearing our soft shell pants so we could unzip our pockets so that provided some airflow. But then we also learned, like, if you're wearing long pants, you just roll up the bottom part of your pants so that you're wearing like a pantaloon, but it actually provides a little bit of a cooling effect as well. So that was cool.
Which I will say that it was different for us. I feel like wearing pants. We've only ever worn pants on the John Muir Trail, I think. I don't even think we wore them in Tahoe last year because it was cold in the mornings but pleasant in the afternoons. So it was kind of different having to like manage your sweating and your overheating type of a thing. So we finally reached the edge of the glacier, and I mean, this was very exciting, to finally get to step onto a glacier. But it was kind of crazy because this had been a very warm summer. So even though this was the very first few days of August, and normally the glacier is not already showing bare glacial ice, it was bare glacial ice for large chunks of the glacier. And so our guide was kind of like, oh, this is actually a perfect way for you to learn how to navigate on a more late season glacier, because this glacier, even though it's still relatively early in the season, is behaving like more of a late season glacier.
So this is the Quien Sabe Glacier. So if you were to get a permit to camp at the Sahale Glacier Camp, which is a backcountry campsite in the North Cascades National Park, I believe you'd be on the south aspect of Sahale, but we were actually on the east side of it, and we were heading up to it. So the Quien Sabe Glacier is a fairly large glacier on that side and more complex to navigate than the snowfield or glacier that you would cross if you were on the side that Cascade or Sahale Arm is on.
And so it was kind of interesting when we got there. He showed us how to set up the rope for glacier travel, kind of explained why we were setting it up that way. And I feel like he was kind of like, okay, pay close attention, because when we come down, I'm going to have you guys set the rope up. So it was like there's already that kind of challenge there where you're like, okay, I got to pay attention. I got to learn. I got to memorize. And then it's kind of crazy because I think that for some reason in my mind, I think like, well, you step onto the glacier, so you're on like the very chill part, and then eventually you get to like a maze of crevasses. But it was like right away, you kind of have all these little crevasses. I mean, some were so tiny. It was like, and in bare glacial ice, you can more or less like see the bottom, especially if they're very tiny. So it wasn't like, wow, I'm really freaked out by these, but it was kind of like, okay, so we're navigating this right away. And the way that he let us up was a little bit different from the traditional route, I think, just because, he figured he would show us a little something different. And we had to navigate through quite a little maze of crevasses, which was really interesting to see the different techniques for managing that. And he would explain to us, like, you want to keep the rope tight when you're heading through kind of like a crevassed area. Or there was even an area where he kind of like cut a little step into it so it'd be easier to step across. And it was just a really... I mean, I feel like every single second I was just like soaking it in. And, there's certain ways that you can switch your ice axe from your downhill hand to your uphill hand, because you always want it on your uphill side when you're climbing. And there are different reasonings why some people carry it with the pick facing forward versus facing backward. And he was kind of giving us all those little details also while we climb. So it was, again, such a full value experience where we were learning minute by minute, and not just like, here's a few things, now we're going to go on the glacier, go to the top, go back to the bottom, and then talk about a few more things. It was like continuous learning, which was super awesome.
At one point, as we were navigating through the crevasses, our guide actually ended up getting out a probe so that he could really investigate to make sure there was good quality snow bridges for us to walk on, because we were really just crossing one crevasse after another. And it's crazy because at the time I wasn't I don't know. I knew a certain amount of information about traveling on glaciers, but I was under the impression that a snow bridge was something that was unsafe and I could choose to walk on glaciers and never go over snow bridges. And so it's funny because as we were walking, and he would probe and decide it was appropriate, and we would continue on, and you look on either side of you, there's a crevasse, but you're walking on sturdy snow that you think, well, I'm expecting it to be sturdy. But I remember at one point our guide was like, you can't go slow in this section, go fast, like walk quickly. And I don't think I realized until after that day that we were crossing the snow bridges over crevasses at that point, where I was thinking that it was just one crevasse on one side and another on the other side, not that it just continues through. And after that, like, course, once again, I'm still working through, getting over specific fears regarding travel on glaciers, but I was like, I will never cross a snow bridge because that is too unsafe. Like, that is where I draw the line. And then I think to realize after the fact is that we were going over multiple snow bridges.
I feel like, did I tell you that?
I don't know.
I mean, I guess I feel like I'd researched a little more than you. So basically on glaciers, what happens is they're always moving and always flowing. And that movement, right, it's ice and it's very compressed. But as it flows down the mountain, maybe there's a really steep drop off underneath it, or maybe it turns with the mountains, or kind of narrows with the mountains on each side. And all of these things are what cause the formation of crevasses. And I'm not an expert on it. This is just me. Right. I'm not saying I'm educating you. Like, you need to go learn your own information, but this is my understanding. And I think it's really cool. They say, think of like a Snickers, and how if you were to bend it on the outside of like the opposite of the way you're bending it, it will be more cracked. That's kind of how like, kind of like an area where you'd expect for crevasses to form. So glaciers have crevasses, and then when it's bare glacial ice, you're more likely to see them. But then in the wintertime, they'll actually get like that snow just really compacting in them. And some have like snow bridges that seem to last over a series of like years. Like, sometimes they can be very predictable. But not always. Anyway, again, I am a layman, so you can always fact check me. But it's just interesting because I think that you don't always know you're on a snow bridge necessarily, because sometimes the snow is like still so well packed, especially like early season, and then later season, like when we were there, or what felt like later season because it was a warmer summer, you start to see more of that cracking. But just because you're on a snow bridge doesn't mean it's like going to immediately cave away and fall from underneath you, because they are actually very sturdy unless you're there at the wrong time of the year and there's been a lot of melt and that kind of a thing. So, I mean, that's where it's like, right, we talked about, I think, in our John Muir Trail series about the Sierra, how sometimes people are able to cross rivers there on snow bridges, and they can be totally safe, but you also need to check even that kind of a snow bridge, probe it with your trekking pole or something like that to see if it's going to be able to hold your weight, because if that collapses, there's high consequences there as well. So that's kind of our little thing. That it's just interesting because I feel like Molly and I had different emotions for our experience on this class. For me, I was like, I'm with a guide, so I'm with someone who like knows what's up. They know what they're doing. And while I would never want to like fall into a crevasse or anything like that, in my mind, I was like, well, this would be the best case scenario if I fell into a crevasse right now. Like, that's not the best case scenario, obviously. You don't want that to happen, but the best case is you're with a guide. You know what I mean? Who knows what they're doing. So I was kind of like, well, if that were to happen, like, then we'll just really, really learn how to do crevasse rescue. But I think Molly was feeling very fearful, and I mean, I guess I can let you say it. But
yeah, I think I just felt like I was doing something that had more risk than what I was accustomed to, and I just didn't want to be injured or die, as is a normal emotion, I would hope. And so
but I think you had a little bit of an unrealistic expectation that like continuously you were just going to fall into a crevasse, which I mean, I guess is realistic. It's just a different way of looking at it, I guess, where technically you could fall into a crevasse at any time, but
at one point I asked our guide, I was like, so is every single place that I'm standing on this glacier a place where I'm at risk of just suddenly like plunging into the mountain? And he was like, no. So it was interesting because as we walked, he discussed like, okay, these are things to look out for on this terrain. And once again, we're giving you guys just this information because it was really fascinating to learn. And I feel like it is valuable But at the same time, this is just something to maybe, if you were interested in glacier travel, to encourage you to take a course from a guiding service that's going to provide you what you're looking for. And we're in our second year of doing this, so we don't know everything. It's just interesting information to share. But we did talk about how, you're looking for areas in the snow where there's a sag or a bowl shape, because that could warn you that, hey, the snow is probably, there could be an opening underneath the snow that you're unable to see.
Or sometimes if you look and you see a crack on two sides, yes. and snow in the middle, that may indicate to you that there's also a crevasse right there. Yeah. So and you know what? I've also talked to some people who, like, sometimes maybe your foot punches through and you just had no idea, Yeah. So you always do want to have, I always would think to myself, like, you can never be lazy. Like, it's not like kind of like hiking where sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'm tired, so I'm just not going to lift my leg completely over this tree and, oh, I got a little scratch, whatever. It's like, no, you have to be like always aware, always paying attention to your surroundings and everything like that. But there are signs that you can be looking out for. And so I feel like people like to really dramatize crevasse falls in a lot of ways. Like, you always see the video of a person just falling into the black hole. But from my understanding, that's a less common experience, and that's not to discount that could ever happen, because it certainly can and does happen. But when I've talked to people, they're like, you're more likely to kind of punch in, a little bit up to your leg. But again, there is a risk acceptance that you could fall into a crevasse. So I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm just saying I wasn't really spending every single second out there being like, I'm going to fall into this black void. You know what I mean?
But what I thought was interesting, kind of in summary, is there are a lot of people that think about, if as long as I stay on the boot pack, I'm safe traveling on a glacier, like this well-defined boot pack. And our guide kind of opened up our eyes to the fact that just because someone else walked there doesn't mean that it's safe for you to walk there, even minute to minute, day to day. He gave us this example of an area on Mount Baker, the Roman wall, where there was a boot pack, but it was very close to an area with rockfall danger. And his point was, would walking on this path that someone else has walked on been the best choice for you, because a rock could actually fall at any time and you're very close, so it might be hard for you to move out of its pathway if you're choosing to walk where someone else walked. And then we were also visiting with someone at one point who had kind of punched through just ankle deep into a crevasse, and Carrie and I were questioning ourselves, like, we had noticed when we were hiking down that climbing down. My apologies. Yeah, that's right. This is on a glaciated climb.
It's not a hike. Yes. So it's on a climb where you need to have different skills.
And we had noticed that there was this area that looked a little saggy, so we had gone off of the boot pack to go around that. And so we were curious, like, I wonder if that person had actually kind of like punched through an area where it's just easy to be on autopilot on the boot pack. So anyways, basically what we're coming to is just we were learning this whole new level of awareness of our surroundings, where we can't rely on a trail that someone has maintained that's static for us. We have to be on a dynamic surface, learning new skills of actually assessing what's around us and continually paying attention so that we can stay on the mountain without falling into or off of the mountain and not letting it fall on top of us.
I just feel like it's so good to like have this discussion, at least if you're someone who's considering mountaineering or want to expand to that. But I just think it's really good to understand and think about the fact that just because there's a trail doesn't mean that you should go on it in terms of when you're climbing on a glacier. Because again, our mindset was always like, it's very leave no trace, right? So as hikers, you stay on the trail because, you don't want to make all these user-made trails, and typically the trail is going to be the most simple way to go. I mean, you're probably not going to get lost if you stay on the trail. You're less likely to put yourself in danger or find yourself in a bad situation. But it was just interesting how on a glacier, you are responsible for yourself, which you are also when you're hiking, but like you're responsible for the route that you take. And just because someone else has chosen to go there doesn't mean that you should. You need to have some context in your mind backing up why you're going that way versus just saying, well, the boot path's here or this dotted line is here. You need to look at it for yourself. And I do kind of like that aspect about climbing. It's like your mind is never on autopilot. I mean, sometimes I like my mind to be on autopilot, I guess, but I mean, you just feel very alive when you're always kind of like, why am I making this decision? why am I making this decision versus just being like, well, I'm just doing this because it's where it is. And so as we got higher on the glacier, it, got a little bit more steep, which I thought would make me pretty nervous, but honestly it didn't. It was kind of cool. Our guide showed us how to do a running belay, which basically is just something where you can use pickets to attach yourself to the mountain to keep yourself from falling off of the mountain, especially because at that point, if you fall off the mountain, there's a crevasse below it, so you'd fall both off and into it.
So 2 out of 3.
Yeah, 2 out of 3. At least it's not on you yet.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he kind of showed us that technique, and I thought that was kind of neat because I'd read about it before in like blogs and stuff, but I'd never actually seen. I didn't understand what it was, so that was really cool to finally have a context for that. And then finally, because the glacier didn't go all the way up on this side of Sahale, we reached the rock. And it was kind of interesting because he said, okay, this is where you're going to see me go from teaching mode to guiding mode, because we had expressed that we weren't exactly looking to obtain climbing skills. I mean, that would just be a whole other thing that we would have, like alpine rock climbing skills, sorry. Just because we'd first have to start with just rock climbing and would really have to work our skills up to that and invest on a lot of gear for that. So that was not something we're really looking for currently. And it was different. There was a shift, right? Rather than kind of like, why do you think we're doing this? And quizzing us and kind of helping us think about it. It was kind of like, okay, sit here, now stand up, now stand here, now go there. And it was still obviously polite and all that, but it was so much less like of a teacher versus just like, we're going to go up to the top. And it was kind of cool because it was a little bit of rock climbing is involved at the top of this. So we did some trad climbing, which trad climbing is just, climbers are so cool. They shorten words. So it just means traditional climbing, which is where you place your own They also must shorten the word for protection. So you place your own protection instead of having bolts put in the rock. So he had showed us how to use the gear the day before because we were going to, they call it cleaning the route, which is where you take the gear that you put in out as you go up. So I think he went up first. Molly was the middle person, and then I was the one cleaning the gear, basically. So taking it out as we went up. And then there we were at the top of Sahale. And it was so cool. To make it up there. We could see down to the glacier camp. We could see Glacier Peak. It was unfortunately a little bit smoky in the valleys, but it was just so exciting to finally have reached the top.
And there were several points when we were getting close to the top where we were basically along a sheer cliff. Like we were climbing a rock that was separate from the cliff, but kind of below us, there was a cliff that must have had a several 1,000-foot drop into, I think it's called Horseshoe Basin. And so that was pretty just amazing to be at the edge of something that's like sheer and that tall. And then the climbing portion up to it was a lot of fun, and it was nice to have a guide that was belaying us while we were doing it. And then getting to the top, there's room for I think there were 2 other people who were going to rappel off of the top, but there was room for about 5 people total, and you could see 360 degrees. Like it's kind of honestly the North Cascades when you're from a high point taking it all in. It's overwhelming visually. You just can't attend to every single thing that there is to see because there's just nonstop peaks in all directions. So it was really beautiful, and we got to just enjoy soaking it in for a decent like 15 minutes, which was pretty awesome, before we then rappelled off of the summit and then kind of reversed course, which we had made number one, we were really...
I would say that it was a really aesthetic peak to have as your first like official glacial mixed with a little alpine climb. Like that was such a cool view, and we've climbed other mountains since then. One that a lot of people climb as their first glacial mountain climbing objective, and I feel like this had a better view in my opinion. So it really had a lot of bang for its buck. It's also where we kind of were started learning you don't stay on the summit of mountaineering objectives very long at all, because there is like a timeline you want to get down before the snow gets too soft. So it's kind of like where on maybe the South Sister, I've spent like 45 minutes up there. You just kind of hang out. On other things that we've done that were kind of climbing. I feel like Mount Whitney, we spent quite a while at the top. Yeah. And on this, it was kind of like 15 minutes. Okay, time to set up your rappel because we're going down.
Yeah. And we were really thankful because this day there was actually a chance of thunderstorms. And so our guide had basically said, like, we're going to go up, but if, clouds are coming and it looks like the gates of Mordor, like, we're not going any higher, we'll descend. And there was never any threatening clouds the whole day. And I don't think we even had any precipitation that day. So we were really thankful that we had good weather in the end. And then also we had estimated based on our pace up to our base camp how long it might take us to get to the summit. However, I think we were navigating more crevasses than we had anticipated, and then we traveled a little more slowly when we got to the alpine rock. So I think we were like maybe 2 hours behind schedule. So there wasn't a lot of time for dilly-dallying because we actually had more content we were going to learn because we were taking a course in addition to doing this climb.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the
Two Sisters on Adventures podcast.
We hope that you guys will join us again next week. Bye.
Bye.